Right, this first part is just the basics of Photoshop, so let's start by first going to Edit, Preferences and General. We'll click on Performance. This controls the amount of times you can undo. Don't set it too high, because you might end up crashing your computer. Let's go to Cursors. Here you've got Standard or Precise. I usually use Precise. That's okay, let's just close that. Right, so if we go and File, New, and we'll set the size to 500 by 500 pixels, red, green, blue color. You want it on 8-bit and white as the background color. You can name the document up here. I just call it test_1, and OK. If you want to see the rulers, you can enable them by going to View and then Rulers. Just take it back on. There's also a grid tool you may want to see by clicking on View, Show and Grid. Let's just turn that back off. View, Show and Grid. You can zoom in and out on the canvas by pressing Control and the plus symbol on your keyboard, and zoom out as well as Control and the minus symbol on your keyboard, as you can see there. This is the hand tool. It's used to pan the document, and also the zoom functions, preset ones. Holding space and clicking and dragging is the pan tool. What's the hand tool, but it lets you pan, as you can see here. If you click on Window and Brush, and that is the brush palette right there. You can undock it by dragging it, and redock it by dragging it back up there. You can also undock all of these little ones, which is Mini Bridge and all these other ones that you don't really need. This is the brush tool. If you click and hold it, you can see the other tools. If you right click on the canvas, you can see the brush options. Obviously you've got different size brushes. You can change the size by here. If you click on the little arrow at the top right of the options, you can load brushes. So you can load all these different ones. Just load natural brushes. As you can see, they're quite nice, organic looking brushes. Let's just put it back. Just select a brush and click on the color picker, choose a color, just go for some green, and OK. Now if we just draw, you get quite harsh lines. So if you change the opacity, you get obviously different measured opacities. If you change the flow, it's hard to explain unless you've got a graphics tablet. It changes the flow of the paint. Let's turn the opacity back up and click on the brush palette. If you go on wet edges and noise, you've got all these different options for the brush that affect the way it comes out on the canvas. So you've got spacing within the brush dynamics. Got the transfer mode, which changes depending on how much you put the opacity jitter and the flow jitter up. Most of these are affected by your tablet if you're using a tablet, which really helps if you have one. So if you have one, I suggest using it for Photoshop, because it really does help. Right. Control, Alt and Z is to step back. As you can see by there, Control Alt Z. This is the marquee tool. You can use it to select geometric shapes. Holding Shift whilst using it allows you to make marquees that attach to the original one. Holding Alt lets you take away from marquees. and Control D is to deselect. Here's your lasso tool, which allows you to draw certain shapes. Your polygonal lasso tool, which allows you to draw abstract geometric shapes using it. And magnetic, which attaches to the nearest line you try lassoing around. And double click to finish it off if it's not close enough. If you want to refine an edge, you can refine it here, which allows you to feather it and also change different things like shift the edges, push the edges out, pull them in. This is to smooth, so you can smooth the edges if they're quite rough. This here is the crop tool. You can set the size up here to a certain specific size you want, which really helps if you want to set the canvas to a certain size or clip it to a certain size, because it only lets you drag boxes that are that size. If you go on to image size, you can set the image size rather than cropping it, because cropping cuts the image size stretches the image to the specific dimensions you choose. So if we change it to 310 and put constraint on, it'll change the document to a certain size. Now on to the main stuff. So first we will drag the background layer and duplicate it by dragging it into the new layer, and we'll delete the old background layer because it has a lock on it. Right, from here, if we go to the settings box down here, we can set different adjustments onto the layer. So we'll just put a levels adjustment on here. By scrubbing these, you can change the levels of the picture, which is essentially kind of contrast and how dark the darks are and how white the whites are, just by dragging the sliders. If we drag the main back slider, you get a really dark image. If we drag the main left slider, you get a really bright image. If we change the channel, you can change it to different colors and change the levels for different colors. So we'll click the button again and we'll put a curves adjustment in. And here we can adjust the curves, which is essentially like levels, but it's a bit more detailed, I would say. The most common shape is an S curve, which brings out the darks and also brings out some of the whites as well, which might not always work in the levels. So you can turn them off as well by clicking the eye. We'll put a brightness and contrast one. Brightness obviously brightens up the image. The higher you go, the brighter it goes. The darker you go, darker it goes. Obviously contrast as well, same kind of deal. If we just delete the curves by dragging it to the bin, as you can see, you can turn them on and off using the eye, just by clicking it. If we add another one, an exposure, you can change the amount of exposure. They're all roughly the same kind of thing, they do roughly the same kind of thing, but in the end they have their specific uses. So I'll add a solid color, just make it blue and turn that layer off. You can also add a gradient. You've got different types of gradient, these are linear. You can change the opacity of the last one by clicking on the top sliders, the bottom sliders are for color, and also location. So you can change the colors of these. You can also drag off the bar to get rid of colors. You can change it to radia, reflected, diamond, also you can change the scale. And then the angle as well. It probably works best on linear. And you can also reverse as well. Just OK that, and turn that off. Let's add pattern. So you've got a nice tile pattern. You've got all these different ones that default to Photoshop. If we just load texture fill 2, all these patterns that are here. You can change the scale. We'll be using these for different textures. Just turn it off as well. You can hold Shift and select certain layers and just drag them to the bin to get rid of them. We'll add hue saturation. What this does is adjusts the base layer hue saturation, so different colors, you can bring them out. You can change the color, so if the color was blue, you could change the hue slider at the top and make it purple, for instance. It just changes all the colors of the normal image. But you've got to be careful with these, use them in with kind of the utmost kind of discreetness, because if you use them too much, you'll end up bringing out noise in the photograph. So you don't want to go over the top with saturation or the hue, because then you'll put too much noise on the photograph. Which essentially could be good with textures, but as a Photoshop rule, you shouldn't. Here you've got your different color ranges. You can scrub between rather than using the channels up there. You can inverse them by holding, I think it's Alt, or you can right click and inverse the mask. You can delete the mask and add another mask. What the mask does is essentially, it's like erasing from the original image, but using paint, using black and white. Black is to define where it affects everything, and white is to define where it doesn't affect anything. So if I paint on the mask layer with white over the, no, sorry, it's the other way around. White is to affect, black is not to affect. So if I paint with white over the car, what it does, because it's got a hue saturation filter on it, is changing where I'm painting with white onto the car to the hue saturation effect. So as you can see here, when it's being painted onto the blue, because I had the hue saturation set to green, it's changing the car to green. As you can see as well down the bottom right on the layer, the mask is also painting onto it. So you can isolate it as well by right clicking it and choosing to view the mask. If we had a color balance filter, we can change the different color balances in the picture. So for instance, you've got cyan and red, green and magenta. You can just crank them up and down until you get the desired color you want to get out, rather than mess around with the hue sliders. You can sort of change from midtones, highlights and shadows. So if you want just the shadows to change a certain color, or the highlights or the midtones, you can. Which really kind of gives a dynamic effect rather than changing the entire image using the hue saturation. If we had another filter, black and white, you can have different types of black and white, so you can bring out certain colors in the black and white, like the reds, the yellows, make them more bright in the image rather than dim. Using this can really help if you're trying to bring out certain textures. Add a photo filter. This essentially is like adding a block of color on the image above and then setting it to overlay and changing the opacity, but it does it all for you and changes the midtones and shadows and highlight colors for you, so you can change the density and also the color. So we create a folder, just name this folder layers underscore color, and we select all these by holding Shift and drag them into the top folder. As you can see, they're all in there. You can change the display type for the folder, so you can have like a different color eye on it so you can see it when there's too many layers. Convert the base layer to a smart object, which essentially allows you to apply effects to it without messing up the image too much, so you can go back and change it. Also, to merge all the stuff, it's Control Alt Shift and E to merge all the layers, Control Alt Z to go back a layer. Let's not save this. So if we go to filter and Gaussian blur, or Gaussian blur, you can set the blur amount for different things. Also filter noise and add noise. This is a really good filter for making things look more metal. You nearly always want it on monochromatic, and maybe uniform and Gaussian, it doesn't really matter. But monochromatic is the thing that really matters, because without it you end up with noise that has colour, which in most instances isn't very good. If you go to filter, sharpen and unsharpen mask, as you can see here is the different previews without it and with it. Just unsharpens the mask. So we've got the smart filter here. We can go back to the smart filters that were applied on it and change what we've done, rather than applying like a Gaussian blur filter or something to a layer and then you're not able to edit it, essentially, because there's no smart filter on it. So we just go to File, Open, and we open this textured background here, this metal galvanized texture. We can go to Filter, Other, High Pass. And change the radius amount. And it creates this effect. Control A to select all. Copy, which is Control C, and Control V in the other canvas. You'll right click it and scale, or Control T to access the transformation controls, and right click to do different deformations on it. So you can skew it, you can rotate it, you can distort it. You can change perspective, which really helps if you want to line up certain things or make things look like they're in photographs. You've got warp, which essentially lays a mesh down on the Photoshop layer and it lets you warp the mesh, which can be really helpful to line up things. You can flip it horizontal and vertically, and if you don't want to save it, you click the X, not the tick. Here you've got the overlay effects, so you've got in full overlay window, you can put it back to normal. If you use the arrow keys, you can just scroll through them. Multiply adds darkness. Most of these add darkness to the image, apart from overlay, which usually adds darkness and also overlays the initial image over it, so color values overlay onto the background image. You just see the effects of them. It's quite hard to remember each one of them, but just scrolling through you can remember most of them, roughly what they do. So you put it to overlay, you get some galvanized kind of metal effects over the car, which makes it look a bit more like flaked metal. If you put a layer mask on it, I think. Actually, no. If you just go to the polygonal lasso tool, and we start lassoing this part of rust here because it looks nice. Just go around the wheel well. You want to get as much as the good detail in it as possible. Don't worry if you go too far over, because that can be cut out. And then click back to the original place where you started. Create a mask. As you can see, it's racing from the actual layer. So with the mask on and mask off, you can also change the opacity of the layer mask that you've just placed on there using the polygonal lasso. Click back on the filters and put level. You can put a clipping mask by right clicking and clipping mask, I believe, what she's done. And then we change the levels of the layer there. Just click on the mask, blur, Gaussian blur. If we change this up, it'll blur the mask, making the edges less defined so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb.